Welcome to 100 Plus, a historical overview of the most important people, places, and ideas of the last 2,000 years. This is a survey of the forces and factors that have shaped today's world, the Christian faith, and you. If these podcasts have been helpful, we encourage you to subscribe and follow our channel, and share with your friends. In today's lecture, Mike will be focused on two of the pre-reformers, John Wycliffe and Jan Hus, explaining what they did that got them sideways with the authorities and why.
The Bible is the most significant book of all time. Now, you may be skeptical of that. I'm always a little bit nervous when somebody tells me something is the biggest or the best or the worst or whatever. I think we're right to be cautious, but in this case, it's not a hard point to substantiate. There's a variety of different ways to do it. For starters, the Bible is the best-selling book of all time, and there really is not a close second. Mao's a little red book, has 800 million copies in print. I happen to have one. Depending upon which source you cite, there are a variety of sources. The Bible has somewhere north of 7 billion copies in print. Secondly, it's the most translated book of all time. According to recent statistics, there are 6,909 languages, spoken languages in the world. Now that number is a little fluid, as you can imagine, mostly today because it's going down, because languages are falling out of use. But over 4,000 of those languages have some portion of the Bible, or all of it, in a written language. In fact, in many cases, there are small tribes that have developed an alphabet and a written language, and people have learned how to read for basically the one and only book that gets translated into that language, and that is the Bible. There are 2,000 languages right now, 2,000 plus languages that do not have any copy of the Bible in their language, and there's a race going on to finish the task and to get the Bible translated into all those languages in order to share about Christ with all those people. And because of computers and AI and other things that are happening, the pace is dramatically picked up, and it's possible that task will be finished in the next 10 years, if not sooner. In addition to being the most popular book and the best-selling book and the most translated book, the Bible is the most studied book of all time. So more books have been written about the Bible than have been written about any other book. More PhD dissertations have been done about the Bible than have been done about any other book. And there's no close second here. On top of this, we can say that the Bible is not only the most significant book, it is also the most controversial book. And it has been, it is controversial because of the claims it makes about itself. So in much the same way that Jesus is controversial because he claims to be God, the Bible is controversial because it claims not just to have insight about life and to be a book of religion and a divine path, it claims to be the Word of God. And it is supernatural revelation. So it's a book that the Bible will claim for itself. So I get that, there's something a little bit circular about this. But in the end, all epistemological claims are going to have some circular aspect to them. You're going to have to use reason to prove that reason is the best way forward. You're going to have to use tradition to prove that tradition is the best way forward. You're going to have to use the Bible if you're going to say that the Bible is the best way forward. So anyway, the Bible makes claims about itself as being a source, dual authorship, it's fully human, but it's fully divine, and that it reveals God to us. So it's controversial in that sense. It's also just controversial because there is power associated with the Bible. Whoever seems to be controlling it, or whoever is trying to stiff-arm it, is fighting battles with the Bible and its critique of them, or that's fighting battles with the people who are trying to get it out there. So today we're going to look at two men who are important for reasons related to the Bible. The first reason they're important is because they're going to be the advanced party for the big revolution that is going to hit Europe, the Protestant Reformation. And as you're going to see, this is so much more than just a church or a religious event. The Protestant Reformation is going to shake every aspect and remake every aspect of life. Government, family, the arts, higher education, business. The tectonic plates of Europe are going to shift because of the Reformation. And the Reformation is based on this return to the Bible as the big source of authority going forward. A second reason that these two men are significant is not only are they sort of precursors for the Reformation, but they are the first advocates to try and get the Bible into the language that the common everyday people can read. At least they're the first ones in a long time. They want to get the Bible into the language of their of the average Joe in Europe at that point. And the third reason that they're significant is because they end up being martyred. Both of them are burned. I'll explain why only one of them is actually martyred. That's going to sound weird. But I'm talking about John Wycliffe and Jan Hus. Perhaps you've heard of them. Wickliffe has a big mission agency named after him, Wycliffe Bible Translators. It's very impressive. I mentioned before, one of my roommates from college was the general counsel for them for a number of years. He recently stepped out of that role, but there's 40 different Wickliffe organizations, and then they have 60 partner organizations. When you put all these things together, because they're operating in almost 100 countries, and so they've got different legal entities, but when you put all these things together, there's close to 5,500 staff for this, working to translate the Bible into all of these yet untranslated languages. When I was working as a college pastor, so this is 30-some years ago, there was a guy who was on furlough. His family was on furlough with Wickliffe. And so the church that I was there, he had like 6 or 9 months off to be back off. He was working, but he just wasn't in the field, Papua New Guinea. And so they were back in Washington, and the church gave him an office. So I got to spend a lot of time with this guy. And he was about 10 years older than I was. But, oh my goodness, our lives were so radically different. So his family, initially it was just he and his wife, but they had 3 boys since then. But they're sort of dropped off. Bush pilot flies them out to this field, and then they make contact with this tribe of people that is isolated, has its own language. And they move in with them, and then they learn their ways, and they become friends, and then they learn the language. And then his main job is then to figure out how to learn the language and then to transcribe the language into a written code. They had no alphabet, so he has to develop an alphabet and then teach them how to read, and then figure out how to translate the Bible into their language. And in addition to doing this, he was doing things like building an electric generator in the stream. He was doing all kinds of medical procedures, delivering babies, and all the anybody that's significantly sick within 30 miles is coming to him. He's breaking up tribal conflicts. I mean, it was just like, oh man, you are living a very significant and adventurous life. So that's what Wycliffe Bible translators are doing. They're named after John Wycliffe, who is one of the guys. So I said that they're martyred. Wycliffe actually dies, natural causes, has a stroke, and but 50 years after he's dead and in the ground, his body is exhumed and burned because he's been declared a heretic. For various reasons, and then his ashes are burned again and then dumped into the sea because they don't want the church, which is doing this. They're not actually burning his body. The church wouldn't do that. They would declare someone a heretic and then turn them over to the secular authorities to execute the capital punishment. But they did not want any of his bones left or anything associated with him left because they wanted to become a relic that people might worship. So his ashes are poured into the sea. Jan Hus is the second guy. So Hus comes along a little bit later. He is born when 10 years before. Let me see this. So Huss is 10 years old, when Wycliffe dies. So he is going to come along after Wycliffe, but he's going to do some of the same kinds of things. And these are the guys that blaze might be a bad word because Huss is going to be burned at the stake. So these are the guys that sort of shine the headlights for the Reformation that is going to follow. They're important because they represent a number of things that are happening at this moment. So there's a lot of corruption going on in the church as we move into the last part of the late Middle Ages. It's going to get even worse as we get into and have these Renaissance popes that, so the Renaissance is going to start in the 15th century, and some of the popes, and this is when you've got the papal schisms, this is when you've got a number of these popes in Avignon in France, and there's just a lot of these men who are not very spiritually attuned, let's put it that way. And they are living as princes. They would often call themselves the prince of the church and sort of live the kind of very wild life that princes might live. And so there's a lot, one of the reasons that we're turning to this is because there's a lot of problems and corruption in the church. There's a lot of tension growing around this. There's a lot of frustration on the part of lots of people over these kinds of abuses that are going on in the church. And one of the things that I want to try and bring up here is that part of what's going on, in this 100+, we're looking at people and events, but I also say ideas. And so the people and events are a lot more interesting to talk about than ideas. If you want to talk about the development of intellectual history in Europe, you don't get invited to many parties. So it's hard to introduce the ideas of the importance of the ideas, but they are significant. And as we are getting into this time, we're going to see with the Renaissance, we're going to see a shift of epistemology, like how people decide they know what they know. But we're also seeing this here as we head into the Reformation. So we're going to see dueling truth claims. And these are going to come up, and the Bible, again, is pivotal to all of this. So, look, I don't want to overstate this, and I'm a little worried as I was working on pulling together my notes. It gets very easy as we slide in towards the Renaissance and as we slide towards the Reformation to note how many things the Roman Catholic Church is doing wrong. And many say nobody was ever reading their Bible and everything was bad and corrupt. I don't think we want to go there. I look forward down the line once we get through all our Reformation lectures and we look at the Catholic Reformation, Counter-Reformation. I look forward to maybe bringing on a Catholic apologist, somebody who's going to push back on some of the claims that I make. I would welcome that. But we're going to see some bad things happening, and especially happening to Wycliffe and Huss. So that's the topic, and it's going to give us a chance today for me to be pastor, not just play a historian on this podcast, but to be a pastor and to say, the Bible is an incredible gift given to us by God. We ought to appreciate it more than we do. So let me back up here and, as always, try and set everything in its context. That's a big part of what I'm doing is I want you to see the flow of history. So this is the 30th, I think, podcast. We've come 1,500 years, so we've been moving more quickly so far than we will going forward. And we're now in the late Middle Ages, which is a bad part of time. I've introduced this idea that there is tension within historians about how we are to understand the Roman Empire in the Middle Ages. So what I heard when I went to college was that the Middle Ages was bad. And the reason the Middle Ages are called the Middle Ages is because there was this pushback against the idea that history should be divided by the life of Jesus, BC and AD. There were people that said, no, that's just the church trying to assert itself on everything again. We really need to see history in 3 stages. You've got the Greeks and the Romans, you've got this ancient civilization, philosophers, the Roman Empire, all this good stuff. And then you've got this 1,000-year period where the church gets in the way and everything gets regressive and you march backwards and it's anti-science and it's anti-everything and it's poor. And then you come out into the Renaissance when you stop looking at the church and stop looking at the Bible and you go all the way back to the ancient Greeks. So they said that this was the Middle Ages and this was bad. So that's what I heard. There is a big push to say, no, first of all, again, the Dark Ages weren't as dark as many people have claimed them to be. There was a lot of better things happening. The Roman Empire was actually, there were a number of good things about the Roman Empire, but that's only if you were free and a Roman citizen. And the Roman Empire could be part of what it was because it's got, so many people living in slavery. And it is just subjecting them and taxing them, and life is miserable for them. And additionally, the control of the Roman Empire was sort of stultifying in terms of the kinds of trade that is going to develop through the Middle Ages when people are more free to be capitalists and entrepreneurs and to do what's best for themselves. So there's pushback on all of that. So I've shared a little bit of that, but nobody disagrees, either theory, nobody disagrees that when we get to the 14th century, so the 1300s, when we're at the last part of the late Middle Ages, lots of things are going wrong. You've got the Crusades, you've got the plague, you've got the Spanish Inquisition, you've got the Spanish Inquisition, you got the Papal Schism. You've got civil wars going on. You've got tension between the peasants and the nobles. You've got poverty. You've got a lot of bad things happening. 15th century is coming and everything's going to change. It's going to be the age of discovery and the Renaissance and literature and art and all this stuff is going to take off. But we're still in the 14th century and things are pretty bleak. And that's the world in which both Wycliffe and Huss are going to carry out their work. So the first guy is John Wycliffe. He's the first to sort of prominently protest the Roman Catholic Church and in particular their view on a handful of doctrine. Wycliffe was born in 1320. I think 1329, and he died on the last day, December 31st of 1384. He was a fairly influential academic. He was also a prominent politician of sorts and a cleric. So Wycliffe is an English philosopher, theologian, Bible translator. He's also a Catholic priest and a professor at the seminary at the University of Oxford. His fame is due in part to his criticism of the Catholic Church, but the real reason that he's prominent is because of his advocacy that the Bible is translated into English. He was born in Yorkshire into a prominent family, received a good education, sent off to Oxford to study, and really never leaves Oxford. He's always going to sort of be associated with Oxford University. He becomes master of one of the colleges, so that's sort of like president or headmaster. He's going to hold various college positions. He's also going to be appointed the preacher at one of the chapels. And then he's going to be training young men for the priesthood. So we know a number of things about Wycliffe that are important to note. He is scarred in some way by the Black Plague. It seems to have hit when he's a young man or a college student, and so he's seeing people die, and that sort of is going to always be in the back of his backdrop. Again, we're going through COVID, and 0.1% of the country, I believe, has died from COVID. And in Europe, it's going to be 50%. So just a dramatically different kind of experience that they're having. So one of the interesting things about Wycliffe is that when he graduates from Oxford, and this is with his PhD, his doctorate in theology, he doesn't go into the church per se as much as he goes into politics. Now, he is a priest, but he's got a very public, outward-facing profile. And he makes friends with really powerful people in the government. He gets some significant appointments. And we see his name showing up on lists of various civil authorities and at prominent meetings. And then what we start to see is he begins to have some theological critiques about civic life. And he is, in particular, he is starting to critique the church for the ways the church is spending its money, or the lavish lives that some of the priests are living. And so he's going to start to criticize this. Now, initially, I think the first time he gets his hand slapped is by the Archbishop of Canterbury, which is, at this point, still a Catholic position. So the Archbishop of Canterbury, for the last 100+ years, has been an Anglican. So that's Church of England, but that's going to be the British Reformation. We're not there yet. So the Archbishop of Canterbury is still a Catholic, and he comes after Wycliffe for some things that he's writing. Doesn't charge him with treason. It's not heresy, and it's not full-out treason, but he sort of charges him with, seditious sermons or something. And so Wycliffe has to go to court at Lambeth Palace. And so what he does, and this tells you something about Wycliffe, he shows up with two of the most powerful men. They're not the princes, but almost princes in Europe at the time, as his advocates. And so this clearly it helps him to get off. The Archbishop sort of scolds him, but he's not, it's nothing beyond that. But it doesn't get completely dropped. It sort of gets pushed up to the Pope. And the Pope is going to come out and issue a little bit more than a hand slap on Luther. I believe he gets excommunicated, but this is when the papal schism is happening. So almost as soon as he issues this papal bull excommunicating Wycliffe, the schism happens and nobody's paying attention to this. And so Wycliffe just goes on his merry way. He's going to have a series of other dust-ups with other popes, and he's going to spend some time in house arrest. I think there's 2 years that he's out living in exile. But all the while, he's also sort of staying in the good graces of the nobility, who actually appreciates the fact that you've got this cleric who is knocking the church, because the church and the state are always sort of locked in a little bit of a power struggle, and to the extent that the church gets pushed down, then the state has more power and can probably get more money out of that. Wycliffe's name shows up in the history books because he gets associated with a Peasant Revolt that happens, a very prominent one in 1381. These are things that the nobility lived in fear of. And there's some effort to blame Wycliffe for this. It doesn't, historians today don't believe that he actually started it, and sort of suspect that he would have been viewed by the peasants, not as one of them, he would have been viewed by the peasants as being a member of the nobility, so it didn't seem likely that he was the one to foment this. Wickliffe is known as the morning star of the Reformation. He's the Luther before there is a Luther. He's also interestingly known as the evening star of scholasticism, so that the movement that we looked at a while back, the scholastics were the very rational, that's St. Thomas Aquinas. So that's sort of coming to an end. He's one of the last people in that. He's got a foot in medieval thinking and medieval theology, but he's also then got a foot in looking forward to the Protestant Reformation. Now, it's important to note, Wycliffe is not a Protestant. So this is 100 years before Luther. He's not a Protestant. There's a number of things that he does not ever talk about or sign up for. He nothing about justification by faith. He doesn't bring himself to talk about sola scriptura. He will criticize. He'll sort of denounce things that are not in the Bible. So he will challenge the idea of purgatory. He will say we shouldn't pray to the saints. He will go after the doctrine of transubstantiation. At some point, as things get tenser and as he gets closer to the end of his life, he's going to go after the Pope in a pretty significant way. But he's never a full-on Protestant. He doesn't believe in assurance of salvation. He believes that there are mortal sins that could, upend you. But all of that aside, the reason we talk about Wycliffe is because he helps translate the Bible into English so that people could read it. And he's living at a time where people are moving into the cities, and as they move into the cities, they get access to education, they learn how to read. Once you know how to read, why am I relying on a priest to read the Bible to me when I could read it for myself? Now, the Bible had already been translated into other languages. At that time, it's basically in Latin. They're going to go back to the Greek once we get into the Renaissance, and they go back to the sources. But they know that there's Greek manuscripts, there have been Hebrew manuscripts, and there's others. All the Bible in the early church gets translated into all these different languages. So there's a question: why can't normal people read the Bible? And so he is going to advocate for this, and he's going to advocate not just for this, but he's going to advocate for releasing, sort of commissioning lay preachers. There's a whole movement that will come after after Wycliffe, called the Lollards. And we don't really understand the origin of this word. They think it has something to do with mumbling, and they think that maybe this is sort of a derogatory term for those people who are not nobles, didn't have a great education, they've learned how to read, but maybe when they read, they're mumbling, so there's some la 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 la. We're not certain. But he is going to have people who are going to be going out and preaching in English that people can understand. And this is very threatening to a corrupt church at the moment. So we don't think we don't think Wycliffe actually translated much of the Wycliffe Bible. We think he translated the Gospels, maybe he did some of the rest of the New Testament, but we think his efforts were more as an organizer to get this thing out and to push it out for others than to have. So in the years before his death, 1384, he is going to be attacking the papacy. He's going to be attacking the lavish lifestyle of many of the priests. He's going to be attacking the idea that clergy should not be able to marry. He's just going to go after a lot of things that are then going to become issues 100 years later when Luther comes onto the scene. So he dies December 28th. He has a stroke on December 28th. 1384, while saying Mass. He's going to die a few days later. There are several attacks that come at him after he is dead. In 1401, there's going to be an anti-Wycliffe statute that is going to be passed, and it basically is going to ban his writings, and he is going to be declared a heretic. And they especially want to get rid of his Bible. And then at the Council of Constance, which is held in 1415, this is the council at which the papal schism is finally ended. Remember, first you have 2 popes, and then for a while you've got 3 popes, and then they finally go back to 1 pope, and it happens at this Council of Constance. Here, Wycliffe is officially, because this is now a council, and so they can take official action, he is declared a heretic. His writings are officially banned. He is excommunicated. And then a few years later, in 1428, his body is exhumed from the ground. His books are burned. His body is burned. And again, the ashes are then put into the river. And there's this little line. You often see it with Wycliffe Bible translator material. It says the Avon, so his ashes are dumped into the Avon, this tributary to the river. The Avon to Severn runs, the Severn to the sea, and Wycliffe's dust shall spread abroad wide as the waters be. So this idea that, yes, Wycliffe has been killed, and yes, his body has been burned, but Wycliffe, and in a sense, then the Bible is going to spread throughout the world. You cannot stop this. So the person who picks up after Wycliffe is Jan Hus, who is a Czech theologian and a philosopher. He's born in 1372. Again, so he's 10 years old when Wycliffe dies. He has an even more tragic story. In contrast to Wycliffe, who came from money, Wycliffe is born in Yorkshire. He's a Brit, and he has money. And he's associated with Oxford University. Huss is born into poverty. He grows up in Bohemia and is associated not with Oxford, but with Charles University of Prague. We don't know much about his youth. It appears as though he decides at a fairly young age to become a priest, or is pushed in that direction. Often this was done so that people could escape poverty. He goes to Prague when he's 10, and he supports himself by singing in church choirs. He had a reputation for being bright and studying hard. At a fairly young age, he gets into the university, graduates with a bachelor's degree, is ordained as a priest, and at that point he begins to preach at a chapel in Prague. And early on, he is going to protest abuses he sees in the church. Again, sort of the lavish lifestyle of priests and bishops. And in addition, he is going to start to read and endorse some of these banned writings of Wycliffe. So in 1401, he becomes the dean of the School of Philosophy at Prague. In 1402, he's made preacher of the chapel. And it's from that post as preacher of the chapel that he starts to get in trouble. If you read a bio on him, you see that he's translating the works of Wycliffe. That gets his hand slapped. He rails against various practices of the Pope, and that is going to have the Pope excommunicate him. This is Pope Alexander V. But again, the schism is still going on. You've got this, 70 years of the schism, and so the church is just not very unified and not able to carry out some of the things that they want to. Huss will speak out not only against Pope Alexander V, who excommunicated him. He's going to speak out against Pope Alexander V's successor. This is called the anti-pope. So the Catholic Church has a number of anti-popes who are people during this schismatic period who claim to be a pope but are not a pope. And one of them, John the 23rd, I mentioned, was just one of the worst popes by any definition. And so Huss is going to speak out against anti-Pope John the 23rd, in particular for the sale of indulgences, because John the 23rd is going to spend down the treasury on all kinds of parties and other things, and then he's going to need more money. And so when the Council of Constance is assembled, so this is where Wycliffe is officially declared a heretic. He had been basically established as a heretic before this, but when the Council of Constance is assembled, Huss is asked to be there and to present his views on his dissenting views about the church. He's promised safe passage there and back. So the Holy Roman Emperor, Sigismund, promises that if Huss travels to this conference, he will be safe. So Huss travels to the conference. But shortly after getting to the conference, again, these things last years, shortly after getting there, he is saying the Mass. Some people overhear him. he begins to develop a bit of a following, and the church moves quickly against him. He is arrested, and he is told that he cannot say the Mass, he cannot do any of this, he's got to stay low. He is then going to eventually be, through all this, he's going to eventually be thrown into prison, and he's going to be given chances to recant, but he's not going to, and so he's going to be declared a heretic, and then they're going to say, heretics actually don't have any rights. You've been promised safe passage here and back, but no, you don't have safe passage back, and he is going to be burned at the stake. And the report of this is he is refusing to pray, or refusing to deny Christ. He is praying for the forgiveness of those people that are burning him to death. He is pleading for Christ the blood of Christ for the forgiveness of his sins. He's acknowledging that he's a sinner, but he's saying, I'm not guilty of the things that you say I'm guilty of. I can't deny these things. The Bible is the word of truth. There's abuses going on in the church. You're not looking at this. And so it's a pretty hard account to read. And he's like the first guy burned at the stake in a long time. It wasn't happening as often as people seem to think that it was. And he is burned at the stake on July 6th, 1415. This, by the way, makes the Holy Roman Emperor really mad, because he said, I promised this guy safe passage, and you knew I promised him safe passage, and you killed him. So he's really mad. And by the way, this will also be important because 100 years later, Luther is going to be called to go and promise safe passage. Luther is going to be called in the same way that Huss is going to be called. And go here to this conference and you'll be safe there and back. And Luther is going to know that Huss actually was made the same promise, and it didn't hold true. So that's going to play into when we look at Luther's life. So again, Huss is burned, and then his ashes are burned again, and then they're poured into the Rhine. They're worried about any relic, anything that hangs, that people can point to and say, this is from Jan Hus. So Wycliffe's followers are called the Lollards. Huss's followers are called the Hussites. And they are going to continue to fight sort of for the ideas of the Bible into the language of the people. They're going to fight for some of these pre-Protestant, pre-Reformation ideas, and it's going to go on and on. By the way, not that long ago, 1999, Pope John Paul II expressed deep regret for the cruel death inflicted upon Huss, and added deep sorrow for Huss's death, and complimented Huss for his moral courage in his life and in his death. So you might be wondering here, really, so it sounds like things were pretty bad. I mean, it sounds like the church was pretty corrupt at this point. How bad were things? Again, this is the bad moment that we're coming to. Luther and Calvin and others are, some people say that Protestants are going to say that the church is bad from the, you got to go back to the book of Acts, that as soon as the book of Acts ends, everything starts to go down the wrong path. No, that's not what Luther and Calvin are going to say. But everybody is going to say that this period right now, the train jumps the tracks. And after the Protestant Reformation, we will look at the Catholic Counter-Reformation that deals with a number of the same issues that the Protestants are protesting. Look, there's just a lot of moral licentiousness that's going on in the church. There's just a lot of bad people in high places. So the lifestyle of some of these Renaissance popes is pretty scandalous, and we're going to see this as we move on. Final question: how important are Wycliffe and Huss? Look, very important in the sense that they are going to argue that the way forward for people is personal Bible reading. And they're also important because they're going to help inspire the path for Luther, who will have some moments of doubt, but he's going to be aided by looking at some of their example. So, as a pastor, I can say that one of my goals is to get people reading the Bible, because if I can help motivate you to read the Bible, then the Word of God is gonna work with the Spirit of God and move things forward. I had a few years ago, I was advocating, and I'll settle for this, but I've sort of upped my game a little bit. I was advocating for what I said, 10 plus 10. Just read the Bible for 10 minutes a day and pray for 10 minutes a day. 20 minutes. This is not, look, this is nothing. 20 minutes a day, 10 plus 10. And I would now, I'll take it, but I would suggest that there's greater opportunity there. But I had some parents come up to me and they said, hey, our son is moving. I go, oh, really? Where's he going? They go, he's going to Africa. I go, oh, wow. What's he going to do in Africa? Well, he's going out into a relatively remote part of Africa, and he's going to help run a mission hospital. I go, oh, wow. I thought your son was in advertising. They go, he is, but he's been reading his Bible for 10 minutes a day, and he says this has changed him completely. And I couldn't tell if they were happy about this, but obviously very proud of their son, and he went, and he did. He got involved in this hospital out in the bush, and he was there for a few years, and it was transformative to him as well. But he points back, when I talk to them, he points back to, just getting into the Bible and reading the Bible is what made such a significant difference in my life. So, Huss was burned at the stake for your privilege of having the Bible in English. But it does no good if you don't read it. So I just want to set that out there. We have Bibles everywhere. There are 7 billion Bibles in print. At this time, there were people that had to fight for the privilege that we have, the right that we have, to have the Bible in a language that we can understand. Well, as I said, I look forward down the line in one of the plus things, the 100 plus, there's 100 lectures, and then these talking to authors or other people, special kinds of things on the side. I'd love to bring someone in who is going to argue a little bit different take, perhaps, on the Catholic Church at this time, but this was a dark moment. So, that's it. I'm working on 2 podcasts. I'm not sure which one will be next. I'm not sure which one will be ready. I'm working on one looking at the most important books of the first 1,500 years in the West, in the church. So basically, not the first 1,500 years, up until the 15th century. So I'm gonna look at what books have sort of stood the test of time that you ought to be familiar with. The second, I continue to work on a podcast on the development of human rights, which again I'm going to argue it's a complicated topic, but I'm going to argue that the rights everybody is assuming have their grounding in the understanding of human dignity and human value, and this is really this is a Christian idea. So I'm not sure which one will be next, but see you then.